When we think about making a decision, a big one, an ethical choice, a career move, we usually assume there's a sequence. You gather the facts, you process them logically, and then you make a judgment. The conscious thought is supposed to be the driver. Okay, so let's really dig into this because the sources we looked at for this deep dive, they're built around this framework of reflective humanism. And they just flip that whole idea on its head. They put forward this really provocative concept that judgment is already happening in your body. And that thought is just the explanation that comes later. I mean, just think about the last really bad decision you made. Were you well rested, clear-headed? Almost certainly not. You were probably exhausted or anxious, just running on fumes. The fact that, high physical stress so reliably leads to bad outcomes, it suggests that the foundation for good judgment just it checked out way before your mind even had a chance to weigh in.
That's exactly the premise we're looking at here. It's about looking at the process before language, before conscious thought really kicks in, even before we label an emotion as anger or joy. The real question is, where does that first selection process, that really primitive biological go or no-go, where does that actually begin? And the argument here is that it doesn't start in the logical part of our brain. It starts in the deepest layers of our physical state, what the sources call the embodied OS.
I think everyone can relate to this. You've had those moments where you've worked on something for hours, a document, a strategy, and it all seems logically perfect. The argument is sound.
Yeah.
Then when you actually make the choice, it feels wrong.
Right.
Or it's not sustainable. Why does that happen? Why does a purely cognitive judgment sometimes just completely miss the mark in the real world?
Well, reflective humanism suggests the failure is structural. It's about where we're putting our focus. When we rely on what they call thinking-centered models, we get obsessed with point evaluation. We need a fixed answer. Is this good or bad? Is this right or wrong? And this obsession with landing on a fixed point is what causes the generating field to solidify, as they put it.
Solidify. That's a pretty dense phrase. What does that actually mean for us when we're trying to decide something?
It means we get rigid. Brittle. Imagine you're steering a ship. If you're only focused on one single point on the horizon, that fixed destination, and you ignore the wind, the currents, all the shifting conditions, well, your system eventually just stalls, or it breaks. The source material says that this loss of flexibility is what destroys the crucial recursive spiral, that feedback loop that allows us to stay dynamic and actually adapt.
So, if our usual logical approach demands we find the correct answer, these sources are saying we should be prioritizing something else entirely.
Precisely. It's a fundamental shift. It prioritizes trajectory and gradient, basically. The speed and direction of changeover, finding that one static, correct point. The goal isn't to find the right answer. The goal is to find a sustainable direction that allows you, the system, to keep moving. Often, that rigid hunt for being absolutely correct is what makes the whole system just seize up.
And this is exactly why the embodied OS is so vital. The body is, in effect, your first judgment device. It's nonverbal. Before you even put a name to something, before you can say, I am feeling stressed, your physical state is already filtering the world and setting the rules of engagement.
Yeah, but we usually treat those feelings, the tension in your jaw, shallow breathing, as just background noise. We think we need to power through it to get to the real work of thinking, like, I'll fix my posture later, I just need to focus right now. And that's the core mistake this framework points to. The sources are pretty clear that these physiological states, your breathing pattern, your muscle tension, your posture, they aren't just experimental noise. They are, in fact, integral to the precision of perception itself. Your body is this incredibly complex sensor that's subconsciously choosing between advance and retreat based on this felt sense of resonance.
Okay, so let's ground that. When I'm, say, holding my breath and my shoulders are hunched up, that's not just me being uncomfortable. That physical state is actively choosing a fight or flight response, no matter how calm the spreadsheet I'm looking at is.
Absolutely. Those are what the sources call the invisible instruments measuring the world. If you think about it neurophysiologically, your body's state dictates which cognitive resources are even available. So if your embodied OS detects threat through that rigid posture or shallow breathing, it's going to pull resources away from long-term, nuanced planning and shift them toward immediate survival. So those quiet signals, your breath, the temperature, the silence, they set the initial conditions for whether your thinking will even be accurate. And here's where that structural reversal really becomes clear. The embodied OS is doing this crucial pre-meaning selection. It's what keeps your cognition stable, and it doesn't need a single word or thought to do it. It establishes that first fundamental resonance with the world. Is this safe? Is this sustainable? And then thought and language and our ethical codes, they all function as a subsequent OS. Their job is to take the direction, the gradient that the body's already picked, and then build a coherent, logical story around it. We are masters at reverse engineering our own logic.
So what does this all mean then? Let's take a simple example. I had a 14-hour day, I'm exhausted, and someone asked me for a big favor. My body instantly registers fatigue, stress, and it sets a no-go gradient, a retreat. Then my mind turns on and I start constructing the reason. Oh, I have to say no because my schedule's too full, or it wouldn't be fair to them if I did a bad job. The reasoning sounds perfect, but it's really just being created after the fact to justify my body's decision to conserve energy.
That is the structural reversal, exactly. The flow of influence is body, then selection, then thought. The conscious reasoning is often just a really good PR campaign for a physiological state. And knowing that can be transformative. It shifts your focus from arguing with your thoughts to actually examining your physical state. Let's go a bit deeper on the purpose of this embodied OS. It's not just a decider, it's a system that's designed to maintain cognitive homeostasis. That's the stability you need for any kind of higher level thinking. It's an energy buffer. It absorbs what the sources call time friction, the lag, the fatigue, the wear and tear that just comes from existing. And that's what prevents the inner cognitive system, the thinking mind, from just collapsing under the load.
Wow, that totally reframes how we think about intuition. Or even just physical discomfort. We tend to treat discomfort like an obstacle, right? A sign we aren't tough enough. But if the body is the primary OS, then that discomfort is actually a critical warning light. It's not a personal failure, it's a technical signal.
It's friction. That's all it is. And the sources introduce a really powerful concept here. Transparent pain. This isn't emotional pain. It's the structural friction you feel when the neat and tidy linear processing of your mind clashes with the messy, non-linear reality of the world.
Can you give me a real-world analogy for that, for transparent pain?
Sure. Imagine you're driving a car with perfect alignment on a road that is constantly crumbling and shifting under your wheels. Your mind is trying to execute the straight line, the logical plan, but the world is demanding constant, costly little corrections. That low-grade constant stress, that physical sense that things just aren't aligned even if you're not injured. That's transparent pain. It's the cost of trying to force a plan that doesn't fit reality, and recognizing that friction is the starting point for self-re-examination, what this framework calls contemplation.
And this all becomes incredibly important when you look at our modern world. With AI, AI systems judge things entirely through language and logic. They use probability gradients, attention mechanisms. It sounds a lot like our own cognitive OS.
That similarity is exactly where the risk lies. AI is brilliant at linguistic rationality. But when human judgment becomes too abstracted, when we only trust the data, the logical argument, we start to mirror AI's strength, but at the expense of our own.
We're optimizing for the wrong thing.
Exactly. The danger is that the foundational human judgment layer, the one that relies on that felt bodily resonance, it becomes harder and harder to hear. It gets severed. We get caught up in linguistic over-optimization. We can make a perfect case for something, but if that decision puts us into a state of chronic physical tension, we've eroded our own foundation. We're prioritizing the logical OS while the embodied OS is breaking down.
It's like obsessing over the latest software update while the hardware's battery is draining to zero.
That's a perfect analogy, and the sources are very clear that the breakdown of our cognitive OS, it doesn't start with a thinking error. It surfaces first as physical signals. The breakdown is precognitive.
We need some concrete examples of those signals, because I think we're all programmed to just ignore them. Like, I tend to think of my chronic neck tension as just a personal quirk, not a warning sign.
Well, you should see that tension as data. The classic signs are shallow breathing up in your chest, habitually rigid posture, or that chronic tension you mentioned, in the shoulders or the gut. These are the precursors to cognitive failure. The body, as the first buffer, is practically screaming for attention long before the mind will admit it's lost. Because if you are an observer of the world, which we all are, and you're neglecting the integrity of your main instrument of observation, the body, your data is going to be flawed, period.
That is a huge shift. We shouldn't see these signals as some kind of personal weakness, like, I can't handle the workload. We should see them as warnings from the embodied OS. It's demanding a change, either in the environment or in the way we're observing. The setup for observation has to be sustainable.
And achieving that sustainability requires calibration. Which brings us back to contemplation, the practice of observing your own observation. It's how you tune that resonance between yourself and the world, moving away from just reacting to the problem in front of you and toward maintaining the integrity of the whole system. So, to bring this all together into a practical application, the sources state very clearly that things like rest, silence, creating spare capacity, these are not just, fuzzy spiritual concepts or self-help tips. They are technical OS restart procedures for the body.
Right. An essential maintenance schedule for our own hardware, not some optional luxury.
Absolutely. The whole practice is about restoring that cognitive homeostasis, letting the body's own fundamental rhythms, your heartbeat, your breath, reestablish the proper environment for accurate, sustainable observation. The sources use a beautiful Japanese term, yohaku, which is often translated as white space or margin.
Hmm.
But conceptually, it means spare capacity. It's that internal buffer you need to keep the whole process of living and judging from collapsing.
What a powerful way to end. The idea that the real ethical foundation of a judgment isn't in some fixed rule, but in a sustainable gradient that your body can actually maintain. If a decision requires you to live in chronic tension to carry it out, then by this definition, it's just not sustainable for your system. So I want to leave you with the central question this deep dive really poses, a check-in, if you will, with that foundational OS right now.
Hmm.
Are you actually listening to your body? Are you reading those physical warning signs? Or is your mind just trying to build another clever case for a decision that's already been made?
And maybe, to take that one step further, if ethics is really the technique of sustaining a relationship, of sustaining interference, and the sources identify gratitude as the vector that does that, if gratitude is that quiet yes to the existence of a vital relationship, can we translate that fundamental vector into a principle for designing more stable social systems?